Hey friends, hey, welcome to the 5 Marketing Secrets class. This is the class for you if you are a podcaster who wants to grow your podcast and make money podcasting. My name is Nicaila Matthews Okome, and I am the host of the Side Hustle Pro podcast. So let's get right into it. So the goal of today's class is to show you how to make sure to market and have a strategic marketing plan for your podcast so that you can maximize your impact. You can build a platform of impact by leveraging your life's experiences, by simply sharing your life's experiences. I know so many of you have started a podcast because you truly feel like you can help other people, but you don't know how to grow your show and make sure it gets listens. So please just stay throughout the whole presentation. If you stay until the end, by the way, I have a special bonus and a free code for you to get started podcasting today for absolutely free. So let's get into, first of all, who am I? Who is Nicaila? Some of you might have come to this class from an ad and you have no idea who I am. You have never listened to Side Hustle Pro podcast, right? So let me just give you a little background. In 2016, I launched my podcast, Side Hustle Pro, and since that time, it has amassed over 10 million downloads and earned 6 figures in annual sponsorship. While doing that, the podcast was my side hustle, and I worked full-time at NPR, where I led the digital marketing for top podcasts, How I Built This, Code Switch, and more. And I have over 15 years of experiences as a marketer at this point. So in 2017, I was able to quit my job to podcast full time. Yes, a year into podcasting, I was able to quit my job to podcast full time. And this is the update I posted on the Side Hustle Pro Facebook page when I did just that. So you can go back and listen to this episode in December 2017 if you want to hear more about that. But let's talk a little bit more about my journey. So in 2022, Side Hustle Pro was actually inducted into the Podcast Hall of Fame by the Podcast Movement Society, which is presented by Libsyn. So that was a really exciting moment, full circle moment for me. And you're probably wondering, all right, well, how did Nicaila get here? And this is just a fun fact. I was born in Jamaica, grew up in the Boogie Down Bronx. And I share this because this has really informed who I am. In case you're thinking that I'm one of these wild entrepreneurs who just has this high risk tolerance. No, I grew up very sensible with Jamaican parents. I have to, cross my T's, dot my I's. I am not someone who just leaps out there like, oh, let me see if this podcasting thing works. I have to make sure I have a plan. And that's why I want you to have a plan as well. So on the road to podcasting, it obviously seems like I've done a lot of things right, but I want you to know that I've done a whole lot of things wrong. And that's also the reason why I want to help you guys, because I know what not to do. So let's go back to May 2015, right? This was me sitting in front of the University of Michigan with my MBA, and I look pretty happy, right? I'm graduating, got my cap and gown, my Mary Janes. I look like the picture of success. In reality, inside, I was freaking out because at this point, I was rejected from my Google internship, which I did in between my first and second year of my MBA program. Thought I would get the job. I did not. And so I was graduating with no job and no money either. And I was moving back to DC to live with my then boyfriend with no income, right? Then boyfriend, now husband. Luckily it worked out, but I needed to figure out what I was going to bring to the table. So once I got back to DC, I said, let me pick up my blog. I actually did a survey to my friends, and it led me to deciding, hey, let me get back to what I really shine at, which is content creation, right? So I, at this point, knew I wanted to build my personal brand because think about it. I'm trying to get a job, and what better way to get a job than to build my personal brand? Or so I thought. I wasn't even sure what that entailed, but that was my mission at that point when I picked my laptop back up. And for me, I started following online branding coaches. Some of you may recognize like the Amy Porterfield, the Maya Elias. This is who I started following at the time to figure out my path. And it forced me to launch my blog, relaunch it. It was tacky, as you can see, all different colors, everything going on. And at this point, I had content, but I didn't really have a purpose. But the important thing was that I got started. So for all of you who are here today and you've started your podcast and you feel like you've made all these mistakes along the way, I want you to know that is not true. What's important is that you got started, and we can refine and clarify your purpose together. Because I learned that you have to be willing to take the first step, even when you don't know where it will lead. That is how you move forward. And I also learned that stepping outside of your comfort zone, that's where the magic happens. Because I'm an introvert, so stepping out and putting myself out there with this podcast and sharing it on social media, that was not inside of my comfort zone, but that is where the magic happened for Side Hustle Pro. So at this point, again, we're in 2015, going into 2016 now. I continue to blog, continue to try to build my personal brand. And then I started realizing a common thread. And the common thread for me was that I loved sharing the stories of Black women, side hustlers, and entrepreneurs. That was my sweet spot that I loved hearing about in my content. And that's when the idea for my podcast, Side Hustle Pro, was born. This was 2016 at this point, and I said, you know what? I don't see this content out there. What if I started it? And by the way, I tried to push back this idea so many times. I said, okay, there's got to be another podcast that talks about side hustlers and has some more Black women entrepreneurs, because that's what I want to hear from, how they did it. There was not. So I had to do it. And even though I pushed back my launch days a bunch of times, I finally launched in June 2016. A year before launching Side Hustle Pro podcast, by the way, I didn't even know what a podcast was. I actually did not listen to podcasts until 2016, 2015. And then a year later, 2016, in the first 7 days after launching Side Hustle Pro, I landed in the top charts. This is Side Hustle Pro on the left, the top 10 in marketing podcast, and on the right, the top 50 in business. You see Side Hustle Pro at number 37. And I was in the same category with some of my marketing heroes at this time, like Amy Porterfield, like I'd shown you when I started figuring out personal branding, who I'd look to, right? So it was super, full circle again for me, because I'm like, wait, how did I end up here? But that wasn't it. That wasn't the end for me. So the magic continued to happen. Side Hustle Pro was even featured on Apple. Here I am, Side Hustle Pro, the new and noteworthy section, with my episode with Curlbox founder Myleik Teele. And on the right, in the bold women category, Side Hustle Pro is featured with a bunch of rock star women here. So I went hard on promotion that summer. I started realizing, hey, if no one knows about my show, they're not going to listen. And if I promote my show, it can grow. And for me, I also had the epiphany that I was onto something, because the reception out the gate was incredible. I had really honed in on a need and my audience. And so out the gate, the downloads were just coming in, racking up. And I realized if I took this seriously, I could quit my job, because yes, by that time I'd finally landed a job at NPR. And I point to, here I am at a conference, right? I got these t-shirts printed up and I went to conferences all summer long, repping my Side Hustle Pro podcast t-shirt. And I saw this quote on this poster board and I just love it. It says, knowing what you already know will keep you where you already are. And I didn't know how I was going to make my podcast become my job, or how I was going to be able to earn money from it. So I said, all right, I need to learn some more. So that's what I did. I started studying podcast monetization, and I could not find a lot out there at the time. So I invested in courses to learn how to DIY it. I said, okay, let me learn how to pitch just sponsors in general. So I invested $1,197 in a 2-day event sponsorship intensive. So keyword here, events. It was not about podcasts, but I said, hey, maybe there's some transferable skills here. Wasn't even podcast specific, but I was eager to learn anything at all about sponsorship. So that's what I did. And then 6 months after launching my podcast, I pitched my very first sponsor cold, meaning I didn't know anyone at the company. I found an email address online and I pitched my little heart out. And from that cold email, I earned my first $4,000 podcast sponsorship contract. And I was elated. And from there, I kept going. I kept pitching more sponsors. I kept landing more sponsorship dollars. I tested out other revenue streams. And then in December 2017, I was able to quit my job to podcast full time. So that was my journey. In addition, Side Hustle Pro has been featured in major publications. And like I said, we were inducted into the Podcast Hall of Fame. But you're probably wondering, how did I go from graduating with no job and no money to the Podcast Hall of Fame? Well, get ready to learn my top 5 marketing secrets to grow your podcast and make money podcasting. These are the secrets I have used to grow not only Side Hustle Pro, but the shows of my Podcast Mogul students. So secret number 1 is you have to make your podcast title memorable and understandable. What I mean by that is that most podcasters do this thing where they keep their podcast super broad so they don't quote unquote put themselves in a box, right? And most podcasters also do this. They start a general conversation podcast with the homies and make their podcast title vague or a play on words or a play on their name or just even something super generic. So what happens when you do that is people can't find you. Your podcast name isn't searchable, and that hinders growth. It's going to take you longer to grow. And nowadays, most podcasters are also doing this, where they are launching in-person video podcasts before they even master audio podcasting. And so when you do that, here's what happens when you do these things. You make it hard for people to find your show. Like I said, it's not searchable. So how are they going to find it? And you make it hard for people to know what your show is even about. Let's say it does pop up in a search. They don't realize what it's about, so they also don't click on it. So you're missing out on a download there. And then you also waste a lot of money on overhead costs before you start making any money from your show. And I don't want that to happen for you. So here's what you should do instead. Make your podcast title memorable and understandable. I know for a fact that this works because it's the process I went through. And again, the process many of my Podcast Mogul students go through. So before, remember when I told you I started that blog? When I came back, graduated with no money, came back to DC, I started a blog and I named it after myself, play on words, Kayla K Speaks. Not only did I name it Kayla K Speaks, but I was talking about a different topic every single week because I was just trying to throw things at the wall and figure out things that could grow my personal brand me as a marketer, and attract employers. So here's what went wrong with my plan here. Number 1, people could not say this name to save their life. They kept saying Kalia Speaks, like they would skip over to K altogether, and it didn't stand for anything. Some people thought it was my speaking website, right, to show that I was a speaker. They really didn't get it. So I knew I needed to figure out what to do to be more strategic. And like many of you, I needed some time to figure it out. So I didn't rebrand right away. What I did was I kept making content because the content will guide you. So after doing more and more blog posts and more interviews, I realized I liked focusing on side hustlers. And so that's when my pivot to Side Hustle Pro came about. And so nowadays, when you see a Side Hustle Pro episode, because my blog grew into a podcast, so when you see a podcast episode from Side Hustle Pro, it's always showing the transformation of someone who started as a side hustler and is now an entrepreneur, is now starting their own business or has started their own business. So like I said, this transformation happened not just for me, but also my Podcast Mogul students. So I want to share Erica's story. So Erica started her podcast, and she joined Podcast Moguls when she already had this podcast. She joined and came in with the Erica M. McAfee podcast. And obviously, you can see what's wrong with this, right? Some of you, if you have your podcast named after yourself, I'm going to share with you how you can remedy this. So Erica was not seeing the download she wanted for this podcast. And it's because no one was searching for Erica and McAfee. When you look at this podcast, if it somehow comes up in your search, you don't know what it's about. All you see is her beautiful smiling face, but you don't know what she's going to tell you and talk to you about. And she has a podcast that is truly impactful. She has a podcast all about grief and pregnancy loss that is supposed to help and does help so many women to feel like they are not alone and get the support and encouragement they need. But because she was making these mistakes, she couldn't figure out how to get more visibility for her podcast. And with the title of her podcast being Erica M. McAfee, she was missing out on brand awareness. She wasn't seeing visibility. And as a result, her downloads were not growing. So through going through the Podcast Moguls lessons, she rebranded with a more targeted title and artwork to the Sisters in Loss podcast. And the thing about your name is your name doesn't have to capture your entire podcast topic in it, but it has to hint at it. And then you do the rest of the work with your description and with your episode titles. But the Sisters in Loss podcast then indicated to her perfect listener, who is a sister who has gone through loss, hey, let me take note of this podcast. Maybe this podcast is for me. And once Erica did that, her downloads tripled, you guys. So that is secret number one, making your podcast memorable and understandable to get that visibility and to get in front of your target audience. Speaking of audience, secret number 2 is you need to clearly define your audience. So most podcasters try to target everyone, all women, all men, all millennials, all Gen Z. Does this sound familiar? Are you trying to target everyone in a category and not making it clear who within that category you need to target? Well, let me share with you what to do instead. So when you do these things, you make it hard for people to know your show is for them, right? You confuse people by talking about a different thing each week, and you waste a lot of time spinning in circles trying to figure things out. So here's what you need to do instead. Clearly define your audience. So let me share Tolu's story. Tolu is another Podcast Mogul student, and she experienced this transformation once she clearly defined her audience. So when Tolu joined Podcast Moguls, she had a lot of ideas, but no podcast. She actually came in without a podcast. So if that's you and you're here without a podcast, listen up. So Tolu, once she went through the Podcast Moguls lessons on refining your topic, she decided to launch a podcast about UI design, user interface design. And it's okay if you don't know what UI is, because Tolu's target listener does. She called the podcast the UI Narrative Podcast. Again, just those 2 letters, UI, was a signal to her core person, hey, this podcast is for you. And she went a step further. Remember, I told you it's not just the name, but also your description. She went a step further by making sure that her podcast description, which I have screenshot here for you, that it was very clear who the target audience was. And she asked them questions in that description that would capture their interest, because if you've ever wondered these things, if you've ever wondered how the user interface UI design was created for a game, this show is for you. And she also really wanted to highlight stories of Black and people of color interface designers, because she felt like those stories were not being highlighted enough. And because of becoming super clear on who her audience is, within months of launching, Google came calling to sponsor Tolu's podcast. And at this point, months into podcasting, Tolu was still growing. She was still a small podcaster. But because she was so clear on who her audience is, Google was able to find her and wanted to sponsor because they wanted to speak to this exact audience. So that is the power of clearly defining your audience. Now, secret number 3 is you need to craft captivating social media content to grow your audience. So once you've identified who this audience is, you need to find more people like them, and you need to create captivating social media content to bring them on over. So let's be clear, because I know a lot of people think that you need a lot of followers on Instagram to grow your podcast, and that is not what this is about. Okay. And most people even think that your Instagram feed needs to be perfectly color coordinated with filtered photos in the perfect sequence. Again, that's not what I'm saying. But here's what happens when you think that. You don't even try to create content, and you miss out on opportunities to share with your audience or make money, and your audience and opportunities remain stagnant. So how many of you have ever had analysis paralysis around posting content? All right, let's talk about it and let's push through this. So here's what you should do instead to make sure that you're going from just being a hobby podcaster to a professional podcaster with your podcast. You need to craft captivating social media content to grow that audience. So let me share with you Shanitria's story, because she has such a fun and important podcast topic, and it's really interesting, and it really shows the power of crafting captivating social media content. So when Shanitria came in to the course, she already had her podcast called Blunt Blowing Mamas. She was struggling to grow her audience and expand her reach, but she used the Podcast Mogul's OMG formula to explode her Instagram following. She went from having 3,000 followers to having 115,000 followers and counting. And she even shared this message on her IG stories when I was promoting my class for you guys, and she just shared this unprompted, and she shared that Side Hustle Pro is an amazing podcast coach. As someone who is one of her Podcast Mogul students, I can truly say she helped me get Blunt Blowing Mama podcast off the ground, grow BBM's IG page. I only had 3K followers when I started her program, and through her techniques, I've grown organically to over 21,000 engaged followers. So since this time, Shanitria has exploded her following even more, and she's now at over 115,000 followers. So she used the OMG formula to explode her audience. So OMG is a systematic process that I teach. The O is for obsessively auditing. The M is for making friends. The G is for going over the data and using that. And so with these techniques, as you can see, she has completely exploded her audience of women who want to normalize moms who garden, as she calls it. So because she has amplified her reach to an engaged community of over 115,000 people who now know about her podcast, listen to her podcast, and pay for her workshops and Patreon, she is able to decide how she wants to leverage her platform to be the most impactful, to monetize, to partner with aligned companies, and the options are endless. And this is all because she was very strategic about growing her social media. And just to go back to her Instagram for a second. So inside of the OMG formula, I talk a lot about figuring out what works for your feed. So a lot of people try to go viral, but it's really about what your audience wants. So if you determine that your audience really likes reels, you find a way to make reels that make sense for your audience. So this is what you do. And then as you're able to grow, you attract more attention to your podcast and your downloads grow as well. So let's get into secret number 4. Secret number 4, not everyone realizes this, but you need to have a mission when you start podcasting. Whether your podcast is a business topic, health topic, a more lighthearted lifestyle topic, whatever it is, if you truly want to grow the impact of your show, there needs to be a mission behind it. So most podcasters do start podcasts for fun and start podcasts out of boredom. But here's what happens when you do those things. you don't have a higher purpose that pushes you to keep going. So, as soon as it gets hard, as soon as life gets busy, your show suffers, you put it on the back burner. And when you do that, not only are you missing out on opportunities to be of service, but you're missing out on opportunities to be impactful and opportunities to have an additional revenue stream in your life. So here's what you should do instead. Connect your podcast to your deeper mission in life. What truly drives you? What is calling you? There's a reason you picked up that microphone. So I want to share with you Marina's story. So Marina is one of my newer Podcast Mogul students, and she did not have a podcast when she joined. So again, whether you already have a podcast or are just thinking through ideas, you're in the right place. So Marina did not have a podcast when she joined, but she had a deeper mission to teach young girls financial literacy. And after going through the lessons in Podcast Moguls, she launched her podcast, Banking on Girls. And Banking on Girls is all about teaching young girls financial literacy concepts, helping them to understand how everyday things can be an opportunity to learn financial literacy, and why it's important for young girls to be exposed to this and feel confident about this, right? So this is something she is super passionate about. And because of this, she just went to the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women and spoke about her podcast in March 2024. This is someone who just started her podcast, is still growing it. Again, is a small podcaster at the moment. And because of the mission of the podcast, the United Nations invited her to speak. How crazy is that? It's actually not crazy. It's actually very, very doable. And so if you have something that you're passionate about, if you want to have an impact on people in any regard, a podcast is the most effective way to do so, because you are able to use your lived experiences to share. It is such an intimate platform. People feel like they know you just from your voice. And the power of that cannot be measured. So now let's get into secret number 5. The secret that a lot of you, I suspect, want to know more about. You're like, Nicaila, if I'm going to do this, I want to know, how do I make money, right? And the truth of the matter is, you can make money from your podcast even without sponsors. So if you're worried about the process to growing those downloads and you're overwhelmed, I'm here to tell you that you can start thinking of it a different way so that you're able to monetize without going down the sponsorship rabbit hole. So most podcasters think that you need a lot of followers or downloads to make money from podcasting. And here's what happens when you think those things. You miss out on clients or customers who want to pay you. And again, you miss out on opportunities to be of service. Remember that with a podcast, you are building a platform, a powerful platform, and you can earn money. You can create a revenue stream in whichever way you choose to do that from that platform. So here's what you should do instead of worrying about sponsorships or getting overwhelmed with that concept, is launch a podcast that serves your ideal client, make it very valuable and very useful, and then launch a product or service for your ideal client. So let me share with you Lori's experience doing this. So Lori is another Podcast Mogul student. She came into the program and she actually had a podcast already, but it was not targeted or strategic whatsoever. It was targeting everyone in the world. It was actually called My American Melting Pot. And again, what that could be about anything. That could be about cooking and meals. That could be about a school. That could be anything. So she was really having trouble making money from that. So she joined Podcast Moguls to learn how to make money podcasting, because she was a little bit restless in life, unhappy with her current role. Even though she enjoyed what she was doing as a professor, there was something in her soul that was now no longer satisfied. And so she needed to figure out another revenue stream. So how many of you, that sounds kind of familiar and you're feeling the same? You're a little restless in life. Well, you might be like Lori. So Lori actually took it to the extreme and quit her full-time job as a tenured professor and moved to Spain in 2021. And you might be wondering, well, how the heck does she do this? And how does the podcast come into to play with it? Well, Lori launched a new podcast using her Moguls training that is pretty much a sales funnel to attract creative writing students and coaching clients. So, AKA, she launched a podcast for her ideal client, which are creative writing students, and she launched a service that was super valuable to that ideal client, which is her coaching, her writing coaching service. Lori is an accomplished writer. She's published many books, New York Times best-selling books, both on her own and as a ghostwriter, and she now coaches students on that exact writing trajectory. And that, your friends, is the power of podcasting. I have experienced this power myself. I can remember sitting at my desk and getting this email from my boss to, can you come to my office? And I just remember feeling sick to my stomach because I'm like, oh my God, why does she want me to come to her office? This is not our one-on-one. You just know from the tone of that email when you're in trouble. So to say I was stressed is an understatement. When I got that email, I was so just panicked in my soul. And basically, when she called me into her office, she said that she had learned about my podcast and she felt like I was that's where my heart was. That's where my passion lied. And she just completely made me feel terrible for having a side hustle. And by the way, this was not the boss that I started the company with, so I was always very transparent. I had it on my resume and everything. But when this new boss came in, she didn't know me, so she was finding about this secondhand. And it made me feel so wrong and guilty for having a side hustle. And then I realized, I said, I don't ever want to feel bad for living out my whole self. I don't ever want to feel bad for being a multi-passionate person and wanting to explore my other interests. And I want to make sure that I live a life that is true to myself, where I'm able to do that. And so I wasn't fired that day, but I knew I needed to make a decision. How was I going to move forward with this platform that I was building that was super impactful? I was getting emails every single week from people who were so inspired and so motivated because of the guests I had on Side Hustle Pro. And so I decided to bet on me. I decided to come up with a strategic plan, even more strategic than I had already been doing, because obviously the show had been growing. But I decided to come up with a strategic business plan of how I was going to sustain myself, replace my income, and podcast full time. And that is what I did. So again, in December 2017, a year and a half after starting my podcast, I was able to quit my job because of that plan. And it all goes back to what I learned when I graduated with no job and no money. I learned that you have to be willing to take the first step, even when you don't know where it will lead. And that stepping outside of your comfort zone is where the magic happens. Stepping away from a secure 9-to-5 job was against every ounce of my Jamaican upbringing. It was against every ounce. We keep a job, multiple jobs. But I knew I needed to step out of my comfort zone because there was a deeper mission in life calling me and pulling me. And that moment in my boss's office was a wake-up call. And guess what? Stepping outside of your comfort zone is worth it because your podcast is the catalyst you need to change the course of your life. Okay. It's a way to change the course of your life. And because starting a podcast is the most effective way to build an impactful platform based on your life's experiences. So podcasting has given me an immense amount of freedom and flexibility. When I had a job, I could not go on this trip that you see me on the left. On this trip, I am on my honeymoon in Tanzania. But when I had a job, I couldn't take it in 2017, which is when we actually got married, because I had very few vacation days. Podcasting allowed me to quit my job and go on the honeymoon of my dreams and work from anywhere. Also, I now have 2 whole babies. So my husband Moyo and I are both certified side hustlers, juggling parenting, careers, and our many, many entrepreneurial passions. So flexibility is huge for us. And when I had a job, I had little to no family leave. I had little to no sick days even. So if something happened with one of my kiddos and they needed to go to the doctor, it was very stressful to navigate. But podcasting allowed me to stay home with my son for 24 months while getting paid to podcast. And today, podcasting allows me to work from anywhere while getting paid to podcast. So this was me on our baby moon. When I was pregnant with my little girl, I took my laptop on the road and we went to Jamaica, and I'm having fun in the sun, but also able to pull up my laptop and check emails and do work and get back to my team and work from anywhere, all because of podcasting. So there are 2 types of podcasters, and you can choose your path, right? So there's the hobby podcaster, and this is a podcaster who started a podcast for fun, has barely any downloads, spent countless hours planning, recording, editing, with no real rewards for your efforts. And then there is the podcast pro. The podcast pro starts a podcast with vision and strategy and has a strategic marketing plan and thousands of downloads, and has a work smarter, not harder podcast workflow, and sees the fruits of their labor with monetization and more. So which one do you want to be? If you're in this class today, ask yourself, which kind of podcaster do I want to be? Because if you're serious about taking that next step and becoming a podcast pro, then my Podcast Moguls program is probably for you. So Podcast Moguls is my proven coaching program for podcasters who want a strategic marketing plan to explode their podcast audience and make money podcasting. It is now open for enrollment if you head over to sidehustlepro.co/join. And again, it might not be for you. It's not for everyone. So let me share more about who it's for. Podcast Moguls is for you if you want to develop your podcast marketing strategy, grow your podcast audience, grow your email list, pitch and land paid sponsors, monetize your show even without sponsors, and get coached by me. So inside of Podcast Moguls, the course itself, these are the modules. So lesson 1 is podcast topic. So you can refine and make an irresistible topic that improves your visibility and grows your downloads fast. Lesson 2 is all about audience. So you can clarify who your podcast is for and attract that listener on autopilot. Lesson 3 is the workflow, where I break down the step-by-step process to record, edit, and organize your show so that you work smarter, not harder, and have a seamless podcast workflow. Lesson 4 is where I break down the marketing fundamentals, so you know the exact steps to take to market and promote your episodes so that your show grows. Lesson 5 is where I go over paid advertising, so you know the exact type of social media ad to create for your podcast to improve visibility of your episodes and grow your downloads. Lesson 6 is all about email list building, where I teach you the exact steps to build a list for your podcast using simple to create lead magnets, aka freebies, that grows your audience and helps you to take them offline and into your world. Lesson 7 is where I break down the sponsorship fundamentals. So everything you need to know to attract and make yourself professional for sponsorships, for sponsors to want to sponsor your show. So I get into the media kit, what you need to include in your media kit, what you need to include in your brand portfolio across social media and everywhere. Lesson 8 is where I break down sponsorship pitching and negotiation. I share the exact email pitches you can use to pitch sponsors and how to negotiate your rate and longer term deals. And lesson 9 is where I break down how to monetize your show, the different revenue streams that you can start today, even as you're starting out podcasting, to make money without sponsors. So those are the modules, and here is the overall process. Podcast Moguls consists of 3 parts. Part 1 is the course itself, which is the 9-module podcast transformation curriculum, which includes my video lessons, tutorials, templates, swipe files, meaning the exact copy that you can use to pitch guests, to pitch sponsors, and more, plus my guides to do everything from how to video record, how to audio record, how to edit, and more. And then part 2 is the community itself. So our private community, where you can ask questions and get answers outside of our group coaching calls. You can post your wins or challenges and get feedback. And part 3 is the coaching. We meet monthly for video group coaching calls with me. You receive personal guidance from me during these calls. So you get my one-on-one coaching within these calls. So I want to share with you a little bit more from moguls who have taken the program. So this is Shirley McAlpine. She is the host of the She's Got Drive podcast. So she said that she joined Podcast Moguls because she already had the podcast, but she didn't really know how to market and how to grow her audience. And she'd been following me for a while, listening to Side Hustle Pro, and wanted to learn from someone who started as an independent podcaster like her and had grown her audience. So she says, I had at that point 25,000 downloads, and in the last 3 months, I'm now at 46,000 downloads. Her strategy absolutely works. In addition, I want you to hear from Fritz Charles, the host of the Coin Gamma podcast. So Fritz said, prior to the program, I kind of was just doing my own thing, not really understanding how to reach out to guests, how to structure and grow my podcast, but there were a lot of benefits to me growing my podcast. It increased my brand. I got a lot more followers on social media, a lot of people reaching out to me for consulting engagements. So because he got clear on who his audience was, because he improved his visibility, he says, I was able to speak at over 5 conferences last year, even being flown in internationally to speak at conferences. And it all came because of the podcast. So that is really the power of growing your platform beyond just a few listeners to truly impacting the masses. So inside of Podcast Moguls, you are getting so much. I'm going to break it down here. So you're getting the monthly live coaching sessions. So by itself, if you were to get private coaching from me for just 1 or 2 calls, that's $5,000. But you're getting monthly live coaching sessions for 4 months, valued at $4,000. Then you're also getting annual community access. Some people charge upwards of $197 a month for monthly community access. That's $2,364 a year, but you're getting that inside of Podcast Moguls. Plus, you're getting all of my sponsorship pitch letters specifically for podcast sponsors, and you're getting the media kit specifically for podcast sponsors, so you don't have to DIY anything. You're getting exactly what works. You guys know I spent $1,197 for this, for an event sponsorship, and now I have tailored this for you for podcast sponsorship, $1,197 value, and you're getting it within Podcast Moguls. Plus, you're getting my guest pitch templates to land any guest of your dreams. And some people charge upwards of $597 just for guest pitch templates that work, or for services that pitch guests for you. And you're getting this inside of Podcast Moguls. Plus, you get my Master the Gram course. If you go over to Side Hustle Pro right now, you'll see Master the Gram by itself is $297. But within Podcast Moguls, it is included. Additionally, you also get the Goal Getter Action Plan, my productivity step-by-step plan for how to side hustle as a podcaster. By itself, it's $98, but you are getting this included within Podcast Moguls. So altogether, that is a total value of $8,553. And obviously, I am not going to charge you that. You can get started for just $297 today. So the 4-payment plan for Podcast Moguls includes everything that I just went over: the monthly live coaching sessions, the annual community access, all of my sponsorship pitch letters and media kits, plus my guest pitch templates, plus Master the Gram, plus the Goal Getter Action Plan. All of that for $297 a month. You can get started for as little as that today. Or if you choose to pay in full, you still get all of the monthly live coaching sessions, the annual community access, all of my sponsorship pitch letters, my guest pitch templates, plus the Goal Getter Action Plan, plus Master the Gram, plus you get some pay in full bonuses. So you get a special bonuses if you pay in full. So the first bonus is you get my pitch email that landed me my first $4,000 in sponsorship. And you also get my 5-day branding blitz that landed me in the top charts in week 1. So I shared with you how Side Hustle Pro came out the gate in the top business charts and also the top marketing charts. So I'll share the exact 5-day branding blitz that I did to come out the gate swinging, as they say. And you'll also get my pitch email to Apple that landed my podcast in the new and noteworthy section. So a lot of times when pitching your podcast, yes, there is a system that you can take, but I also reached out directly to people who worked at Apple to get myself on the radar, and it worked. As a small independent podcaster, I was featured with podcasts who are on major networks, and at the time I was not on a network. And you also get my pitch email that landed me my first international speaking engagement in Barbados. So if you are trying to get flown out, and if you're trying to book stages to speak because of your podcast and the platform that you are building, I will share with you an exact email pitch that works like a charm. And these are all part of the pay in full bonus. So again, here's the breakdown. You can get started for as little as $297 a month. It's a 4-payment plan, and you're able to pay 30 days. After your first payment, you'll be charged again. Or if you pay in full, you receive those special bonuses of my $4,000 sponsorship pitch email, my 5-day branding blitz, my pitch email for Apple Podcasts, and my pitch email for speaking engagements. So as you're assessing all of this, and again, you head over to sidehustlepro.co/join to go ahead and enroll in Podcast Moguls. But as you're assessing all this, I know there's always the question of, okay, is this worth it? Should I invest in this? And I just want to share kind of a calculation that I use. I call it my would it be worth it if calculation. And I always ask myself, would it be worth it if I got X results? So think about what result you're looking for. You might think about something like, would it be worth it if you could surpass 100,000 downloads in a few months like Nia did? Nia Clark is the host of the Dreams of Black Wall Street podcast. She entered the Podcast Moguls program with a completely different podcast, you guys. So another student who came in with a completely different podcast. And because of Podcast Moguls, she was able to launch Dreams of Black Wall Street, and then 2 weeks into podcasting, 4 months into podcasting, she surpassed 100,000 downloads. So would it be worth it to you if you had those kind of results? If you went from having just a few hundred downloads to 100,000 downloads? Nia says that, I have to say, I really was not expecting my podcast to take off the way it did. I could never imagine my podcast would do that well. And really, it's because of what I learned in Podcast Moguls. So again, you guys, Podcast Moguls is now open for enrollment. The doors are currently open, and you want to get in now at these promotional rates, because the rates will go up when the class promotional rate is over, when this class is no longer available, those rates are going up. So you have two options, really. You can keep trying to DIY your podcast with tips gathered all over social media and YouTube, or you have the second option, which is decide to make podcasting a priority and get my coaching to know exactly where to start and what steps to take. So option number one, you can keep being a hobby podcaster, or option number two is you can go ahead and step into the world of being a podcast pro. And your two options, you can get started today for as little as $297 per month, or you can pay in full one-time payment of $997. You never have to worry about another payment, and you receive this pay in full bonus of my $4,000 sponsor pitch email, my 5-day branding blitz, my pitch email for Apple Podcast feature, my pitch email for my speaking engagement. With the pay in full enrollment, you do save money. It is slightly more expensive for the 4-payment plan. And again, whichever plan that you choose, whenever I update the program, you still have access to all of those updates. So go ahead and get started today. Reminder of all the things you're getting. You're getting monthly live coaching sessions for 4 months. You're getting annual community access. You're getting all of my sponsorship pitch letters and media kits. You're getting my guest pitch templates, plus Master the Gram, plus the Goal Getter Action Plan. And all of that is a total value of $8,553. Oh, guys, and I'm going to reveal one secret to you. Even though you're technically only given 4 monthly live coaching sessions, I never turn anyone away if you want to keep coming to live coaching. So that is a special bonus as well. So speaking of bonuses, join Podcast Moguls today. It's open over at sidehustlepro.co/join. Go ahead and click that link. And thank you so much for staying until the end. You can use code HustlePro to get the rest of this month and all of next month free on Libsyn.com. So you can start hosting your podcast for absolutely free today on Libsyn.com with code HustlePro. Now head over to join Podcast Moguls at sidehustlepro.co/join. I really look forward to seeing you inside. And if you have any questions at all, just reach out to me and the team at hi@sidehustlepro.co. Thank you for joining.